I found out the HOA was planning to fine me $2,000 when Barbara Mitchell cornered me at my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, waving a violation notice like she just won the lottery. "Harrison Reynolds, this is unacceptable," she announced, her voice carrying across the parking lot of Sunset Creek condominiums in Scottsdale, Arizona. "Your units are in violation of at least 8 separate HOA regulations, and the board has unanimously decided to take action." I glanced at the notice, my coffee still warm in my other hand. Unmowed grass on Unit 14. Unapproved patio furniture color on Unit 7. Unauthorized window treatments on Unit 21. The list went on, each violation more ridiculous than the last. I looked up at Barbara, her highlighted blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her tennis outfit pressed and pristine. "Barbara, I'll take care of it," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You've had multiple warnings, Harrison. The board meeting is tonight at 7 and we'll be voting on the fines. I suggest you attend." She turned on her heel and walked away, her white sneakers squeaking against the pavement. I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. Sunset Creek was a development of 48 condo units, and I'd been quietly buying them up over the past 3 years as investment properties. What Barbara didn't know, what none of the board members knew, was exactly how many units I owned. They saw me as just another property owner, maybe with a few rental units scattered around the complex. The truth was considerably different. I walked back to my primary residence, Unit 1, and pulled out my property files. 32 units. I owned 32 of the 48 condos in Sunset Creek. I'd been strategic about it, using different LLCs and holding companies to make the purchases, managing them through various property management services to avoid drawing attention. My investment strategy had been simple: buy undervalued condos in a good location, rent them out, and build long-term equity. I'd never intended to get involved in HOA politics, but $2,000 in fines for nonsense violations, that changed things. I spent the day making calls. First to my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who'd handled all the property acquisitions. "Marcus, I need to know the exact process for HOA board elections under Arizona law." "Harrison, what are you planning?" Marcus asked, but I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Just researching my options." "Can you send me the HOA bylaws and the state statutes on association governance? Give me an hour." Next, I called my property managers. I had 3 different companies handling my various units to maintain the illusion of diverse ownership. "I need detailed reports on every violation notice you've received in the past 6 months, I told each of them. "And I need to know if any of you have been having issues with the HOA board." The answers were illuminating. Apparently, Barbara and her cronies had been on a violation spree for months, targeting rental properties specifically. They'd fined Unit 12 for having a wreath on the door during summer. Unit 18 got hit for parking a pickup truck in a designated spot because it lowered property values. Unit 29 was cited for having outdoor lights that were the wrong shade of white. By 5 o'clock, I had a clear picture. The HOA board, led by Barbara Mitchell as president, along with Vice President Cynthia Drake and Treasurer Margaret Hoffman, had been systematically harassing rental property owners. They wanted Sunset Creek to be an owner-occupied community, and were using violation notices and fines as a weapon to make life difficult for landlords. They'd picked the wrong landlord. I showed up to the board meeting at 6:45, carrying a leather folder. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building with a kitchenette and a large multipurpose room. About 15 people were scattered in the folding chairs facing a table where Barbara, Cynthia and Margaret sat like judges at a tribunal. Barbara's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Harrison, glad you could make it. We'll get to your violations shortly." "Take your time," I said, settling into a chair in the back row. The meeting started with the usual tedium. Minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, discussion about resurfacing the pool deck. Barbara ran the meeting with an iron fist, cutting off anyone who tried to speak out of turn. Cynthia, a thin woman in her 50s with nervous energy, took notes frantically. Margaret, heavyset with reading glasses on a chain, barely looked up from her papers. Then came the violation reports. "We have several properties in serious violation," Barbara announced. Unit 7, Unit 12, Unit 14, Unit 18, Unit 21, Unit 29, and Unit 33. Most of these are rental properties, and the owners have been notified multiple times. The board recommends fines of $2,000 per property for failure to comply. "That's $14,000 in fines," someone muttered from the front row. "The rules exist for a reason," Barbara said sharply. "We have standards in this community. If people can't maintain their properties to code, they shouldn't own here." "What about the violations on Unit 4? A voice called out. "I saw trash cans left out for 3 days last week." Barbara's face tightened. Unit 4 was her own condo. That was due to a medical emergency. Completely different situation. Now, all in favor of the fines. "Wait," I said, standing up. "I'd like to review the specific violations and the relevant bylaws before any vote." Barbara sighed dramatically. "Harrison, we've been over this. You received written notice." "I received a list of alleged violations. I haven't seen the section of the bylaws that makes window treatment colors a finnable offense. I haven't seen the documentation that my grass was measured and found to be too long. I haven't seen any photos or evidence of these violations." "Are you calling me a liar?" Barbara's voice rose. "I'm asking for due process," I said calmly. According to Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 33, Chapter 16, an HOA must provide owners with specific notice of violations, including the bylaw section violated, and an opportunity to cure before imposing fines. I don't see cure periods listed on any of these notices. The room went quiet. Marcus had sent me the relevant statutes and I'd memorized the key passages. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Barbara, he might have a point. Did we send cure notices?" "We sent violation notices," Barbara snapped. "That's sufficient." "Actually, it's not," I said. "The statute requires a minimum 10-day cure period for most violations before any fines can be imposed. None of these notices are dated more than 10 days ago." Barbara's face was turning red. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to weasel out of legitimate fines." "I'm trying to ensure this board follows the law," I countered. "I move to table the violation fines until proper notice has been given according to state statute." "You can't make motions. You're not on the board," Barbara said triumphantly. "Any unit owner can make motions at an HOA meeting," I replied. "That's in your own bylaws, Article 6, Section 3. I could see Cynthia frantically flipping through a binder. She looked up at Barbara and nodded reluctantly. Barbara's jaw clenched. "Fine. Is there a second?" "I second it," said a man in the front row. I recognized him as Tom Parker, who owned Unit 9. "All in favor?" Barbara asked through gritted teeth. Most hands went up, including Margaret's. Barbara and Cynthia voted against it, but they were outvoted. "Motion passes," I said helpfully. "The fines are tabled." Barbara gathered her papers with sharp movements. "If there's no other business, this meeting is adjourned." She stood up without waiting for a response and marched toward the door. "Actually, there is other business," I said. "I'd like to discuss board elections." Barbara stopped. Elections aren't until November. It's only June. I'm aware. I'm asking about the process for calling a special election. Why would we need a special election? Cynthia asked nervously. Because I don't believe the current board represents the best interests of this community, I said. According to the bylaws, 20% of unit owners can petition for a special election. I'd like to know how many signatures that would require. Barbara laughed, a harsh sound. 20% of 48 units. You'd need signatures from 10 units. Good luck with that, Harrison. Most people don't want to get involved. 10 units, I repeated. That's good to know. Thank you, Barbara. I left the meeting and went home, where I spread out my ownership documents on the dining room table. 32 units, through 17 different LLCs and holding companies. I spent the next 3 hours drafting a petition for a special election, then creating signature pages for each of my entities. The legal question was whether each unit got a vote or each owner got a vote. I called Marcus, even though it was past 10. Sorry to call late, but I need to know. In Arizona HOA law, does each unit get a vote or each owner? Each unit, Marcus said. Why? Oh no, Harrison, what are you doing? Exercising my rights as a property owner. If I own 32 units through various entities, those are 32 separate votes, correct? Technically, yes, but Harrison, this is going to cause problems. The problems already exist, I said. I'm just solving them. The next morning, I submitted the petition for a special election to the HOA board, with signatures from 32 units, representing exactly 2/3 of the entire community. I sent it via certified mail and email to all 3 board members. Barbara called me within an hour. What the hell is this? A petition for a special election, as provided for in the bylaws. You forged signatures. This is fraud. Every signature is legitimate. Each unit owner has the right to petition. If you'd like to verify the signatures, I can provide documentation of ownership for each unit. There was a long silence. How many units do you own, Harrison? Enough to call for an election. The bylaws state that once a valid petition is submitted, the board must hold a special election within 30 days. I'll expect notice of the election date by end of business tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. The next few days were chaos. Barbara went door to door, trying to rally the owner-occupied units against me. She sent out an email blast to all residents warning about corporate landlords taking over our community. She called an emergency board meeting to discuss the petition. Though there was nothing to discuss, the bylaws were clear. I spent the time talking to the other unit owners, particularly those who'd been hit with violation notices. Tom Parker from Unit 9 had been fined $500 for planting flowers in the wrong color pot. Linda Vasquez from Unit 16 had been cited for having a doormat that was 2 inches larger than the allowed dimensions. I can't believe they measured my doormat, Linda said when I stopped by. Who does that? Someone who's forgotten this is supposed to be a community, not a dictatorship, I replied. There's going to be a special election. I hope you'll consider running for the board. Me. I don't know anything about running an HOA. You know that measuring doormats is insane. That's more qualification than the current board has. I had similar conversations with several other owners. By the end of the week, I had a slate of candidates ready to run. Tom Parker for president, Linda Vasquez for vice president, and David Chen from Unit 26 for treasurer. All 3 were reasonable people who'd been harassed by the current board. The official notice of special election came out 10 days after my petition. The vote would be held on July 15th, with nominations due by July 1st. The notice included a pointed paragraph about how certain parties were trying to undermine community values through manipulation of corporate ownership structures. I showed it to Marcus, who winced. She's really going for the jugular. Can she block my vote somehow? Not legally. Each unit gets a vote. The method of ownership doesn't matter as long as it's legitimate. But Harrison, you need to be prepared for major backlash. When people find out you own 2/3 of the complex, they're going to be angry. Some will be, I acknowledged, but I've been a good landlord. My properties are well maintained. My tenants are quiet and respectful. I pay my HOA dues on time. The only reason I'm in this situation is because Barbara decided to target rental properties. Just be careful. HOA fights can get ugly. He wasn't wrong. The campaign period was brutal. Barbara put up signs all over the complex warning about corporate takeover and the death of community living. She organized a meeting of owner-occupied units, excluding renters and landlords, to discuss protecting our homes. When several people pointed out this was probably illegal, she claimed it was a private gathering of concerned citizens. Cynthia went around leaving flyers on doors that listed every code violation in the complex, with special highlighting for rental properties. Margaret sent out financial reports showing that rental units supposedly caused more wear and tear on common areas, though her methodology was questionable at best. I stayed relatively quiet, but I made sure my candidates were visible and accessible. Tom set up a website outlining a common-sense approach to HOA governance. Enforce reasonable rules fairly, maintain the property well, and stop treating residents like criminals. Linda hosted a coffee meetup at the clubhouse where people could discuss concerns. David created a transparent budget proposal showing exactly where HOA funds would go. The nomination deadline came. Barbara, Cynthia, and Margaret all filed to run for re-election. My 3 candidates filed. And then, at the last minute, a 4th slate appeared. 3 residents from the owner-occupied units who were tired of Barbara's tactics, but also nervous about my ownership level. This could split the vote, Tom said when we met to discuss strategy. It could, I agreed. But ultimately, I have 32 votes. You need 25 votes to win. As long as we hold the owner-occupied units who are fed up with Barbara, we'll be fine. Are you going to reveal how many units you own before the election? Linda asked. I'd been thinking about this. I have to. It'll come out anyway when the votes are tallied. Better to control the narrative than let Barbara do it. I drafted an open letter to the community and posted it on the Sunset Creek Facebook page, emailed it to all residents, and printed copies to leave in the clubhouse. Dear neighbors, it began. By now you've heard about the special election and the controversy surrounding it. I want to be transparent about my role in this situation. Over the past 3 years, I have purchased 32 condominium units in Sunset Creek through various investment entities. This represents 2/3 of our community. I understand this may come as a surprise, and some of you may have concerns about concentrated ownership. I want to address this directly. The letter went on to explain my investment strategy, my commitment to maintaining the properties, my track record as a landlord, and my reasons for calling the election. I included testimonials from several tenants about their positive experiences. I outlined my vision for the HOA: fair enforcement of reasonable rules, transparent finances, and treating all residents with respect regardless of whether they owned or rented. I did not set out to own the majority of this complex, the letter concluded. But now that I do, I have a responsibility to ensure it's managed well. The current board has lost sight of what an HOA should be: a tool for maintaining property values and quality of life, not a weapon for punishing people they disagree with. I hope you'll support candidates who will return common sense and fairness to our community governance." The response was mixed. Some people thanked me for my honesty. Others accused me of being a slumlord, despite evidence to the contrary. Several tenants came forward with their own stories about how I'd been responsive to maintenance issues and fair with rent prices. Barbara's response was predictable. She sent out another email blast calling me a corporate raider who was trying to steal our community. She claimed I'd been secretly buying up units to take control, and that my real plan was to run the complex into the ground, then sell it to developers who would tear everything down. "That doesn't even make sense," Tom said when he read it. "If you wanted to redevelop, you wouldn't have spent 3 years fixing up the units." "Logic isn't Barbara's strong suit," I replied. The election was held on a Saturday in the clubhouse. According to the bylaws, voting was done by written ballot, with each unit owner getting 1 vote per unit. I showed up with stacks of ballots, one for each of my 32 units, each properly marked with the unit number and the corresponding LLC name from the ownership records. Barbara turned purple when she saw them. "This is fraud. You can't vote 32 times." "Each unit gets 1 vote," I said calmly. "I own 32 units. That's 32 votes. If you'd like to challenge this, we can consult with the HOA's attorney, but I assure you I've already verified this with my own legal counsel." Margaret, who was overseeing the election, looked uncomfortable. "He's right, Barbara. The bylaws say each unit gets 1 vote. We never specified that one owner couldn't hold multiple units. Because no one expected someone to buy up the entire complex," Barbara shouted. "I don't own the entire complex," I corrected. "I own 2/3. There are 16 other units with different owners. Those 16 other owners were watching this exchange with varying expressions of concern, amusement, and calculation. I'd talked to most of them over the past few weeks. Some were supportive, some were wary, and a few were openly hostile. But they were all paying attention. The voting took about an hour. Each owner came forward, showed ID, verified their unit number against the ownership records, and submitted their ballot. I submitted my 32 ballots in a neat stack, each one properly filled out and signed by the authorized representative of the corresponding LLC. When all votes were cast, Margaret, Cynthia, and an independent counter from the HOA's management company began tallying. The process was done in front of everyone, with each ballot read aloud. It wasn't even close. Tom Parker received 38 votes for president. Linda Vasquez got 36 votes for vice president. David Chen received 37 votes for treasurer. Barbara, Cynthia, and Margaret each received between 6 and 8 votes, all from the most loyal owner-occupied units. The alternative slate got 1 or 2 votes each. Barbara stood frozen as the results were announced. "This isn't legal. I'm challenging this election." "On what grounds?" Tom asked. "On the grounds that one person can't control the entire board." "I don't control the board," I said. "I voted for 3 qualified candidates who will serve the community well. I don't hold any board position myself. This is a farce. I'm consulting with an attorney." "That's your right," Tom said diplomatically. "But according to the bylaws, these results are official. The new board will take office immediately." "Barbara, Cynthia, Margaret, thank you for your service. We'll need you to turn over all HOA records, financial documents, and property access within 48 hours as specified in the transition procedures." Barbara grabbed her purse and stormed out. Cynthia looked like she might cry. Margaret just seemed relieved it was over. The transition was rocky. Barbara dragged her feet on turning over records, claiming she needed time to organize them. When the documents finally arrived, they were a mess: incomplete financial records, missing correspondence, violation notices that had never been properly documented. "This is either incompetence or deliberate obstruction," David said as we sorted through boxes of papers in the clubhouse. "Look at this. They spent $12,000 on legal consultations last year, but there's no detail about what those consultations were for." Tom was reviewing the violation files. "Half of these notices don't have proper documentation. No photos, no measurements, just Barbara's word that something was wrong. And look at this, she wrote herself a warning for the trash can thing, but never actually issued it. It was just for show." Linda found something more concerning. "The HOA has a reserve fund that's supposed to have about $80,000 for major repairs. According to these statements, there's only $43,000. Where did the rest go?" We spent the next week reconstructing the HOA's finances. What we found was troubling. Barbara had been using HOA funds for questionable expenses, catering for board meetings that only the 3 board members attended, community beautification projects that seemed to only affect the areas around her unit, and those mysterious legal consultations. "We need to bring in a forensic accountant," David said. "This could be embezzlement." "Let's be careful," Tom cautioned. "We don't want to make accusations we can't prove, but the more we dug, the worse it looked." Barbara had approved payments to a landscaping company that turned out to be owned by her brother-in-law. The company had been paid nearly $15,000 over 2 years for services that the regular HOA landscaper should have been providing. When we contacted the regular landscaper, he said the HOA had been reducing his contract scope, but he didn't know why. "That's fraud," Marcus said when I showed him the documents. "She was funneling HOA money to a family member's business for unnecessary services. You need to report this." "To who?" "The police. Start with the Arizona Attorney General's office. They have a division that handles HOA complaints. You might also want to file a civil suit to recover the funds." The new board met to discuss the situation. After reviewing all the evidence, we voted unanimously to report Barbara's actions to the state and to pursue legal action to recover the misappropriated funds. Barbara found out quickly someone at the management company must have tipped her off. She showed up at my door on a Thursday evening, her perfect composure finally cracked. "You're trying to destroy me," she said, tears running down her face. "Over what?" "Some petty HOA politics." "This isn't about politics," I said. "You stole from the HOA. You used community funds for personal benefit. That's not politics. It's a crime." "It wasn't stealing. The community needed better landscaping. My brother-in-law gave us a good rate." "Your brother-in-law's company charged more than the existing landscaper and provided fewer services. You created a need that didn't exist so you could funnel money to family. That's textbook fraud, Barbara. I've given 3 years of my life to this community. I've worked tirelessly to maintain standards to keep this place nice. You've spent 3 years harassing residents over nonsense violations while stealing from the reserve fund. You've abused your position and broken the law. The fact that you convinced yourself you were doing good doesn't change that." She wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. "You think you're so smart. You came in here with your corporate money, bought up everything, and now you're playing victim. You're the problem, Harrison. People like you are destroying communities. People like me are investing in communities. I've improved every property I bought. I've been a responsive landlord. I've created quality housing for renters who can't afford to buy. The only person destroying this community is you." She left without another word. I felt a twinge of something not quite sympathy, but a recognition of how far she'd fallen. She'd probably started with good intentions, wanting to maintain community standards. But power, even the small power of an HOA board, can corrupt. She'd started seeing herself as the protector of the community, which made anything she did justified in her mind. The legal process moved slowly. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation. The new board filed a civil suit against Barbara, Cynthia, and Margaret for breach of fiduciary duty. Barbara hired an attorney who tried to claim everything was a misunderstanding, that the landscaping contract had been properly approved, and that the board had full authority to make those decisions. Technically, she's right that the board could hire contractors, Marcus explained. But she had a conflict of interest that she didn't disclose. She should have recused herself from any vote involving her brother-in-law's company. And she definitely shouldn't have been reducing the existing landscaper's contract without community input. The investigation took months. During that time, the new board worked to repair the damage. We reinstated the full landscaping contract. We dropped all the bogus violation notices. We established clear, reasonable standards for property maintenance and a fair process for addressing actual problems. We published monthly financial reports so everyone could see where the money was going. The community started to heal. Residents stopped being afraid they'd come home to another ridiculous violation notice. Renters felt welcomed instead of targeted. The Facebook page, which had been a war zone during the election, became a place where people actually helped each other out. I stayed in the background mostly. I showed up to board meetings as a property owner but didn't try to micromanage. Tom, Linda, and David were doing a great job and they didn't need me hovering. But I made sure my properties were maintained to high standards. Fresh paint, updated appliances, well-kept landscaping. I wanted to prove that rental properties could be just as nice as owner-occupied units, that landlords could be responsible community members. One afternoon in October, about 4 months after the election, I was replacing a faucet in Unit 21 when Tom called. "The AG's office finished their investigation," he said. "They're pressing charges." Barbara was charged with fraud and theft. The amounts were significant enough to make them felonies. Over $37,000 had been misappropriated over a 2-year period. Cynthia was charged as an accessory since she'd co-signed many of the checks. Margaret cut a deal to testify against the others in exchange for immunity. She claimed she'd had concerns, but Barbara had intimidated her into staying quiet. The criminal trial took place the following spring. I attended several days of it, sitting in the back of the Maricopa County Courthouse, watching prosecutors lay out the evidence. Barbara's attorney tried to argue that this was a civil matter, a dispute over HOA governance, not a criminal case. But the financial records were damning. The prosecution showed a clear pattern of self-dealing, of creating unnecessary contracts to benefit family members, of hiding expenditures from the community. Barbara took the stand in her own defense, which her attorney probably regretted. She was defiant, insisting she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been trying to improve the community, that she was being persecuted for standing up to corporate landlords. "Miss Mitchell," the prosecutor said during cross-examination, "you've testified that you believe these expenditures were in the community's best interest. Is that correct?" "Yes," Barbara said firmly. "Did you disclose to the community that the landscaping company you hired was owned by your brother-in-law?" "I didn't think it was relevant." "You didn't think it was relevant that you were directing HOA funds to a family member's business?" He was qualified. He did good work. "Did you seek competitive bids from other companies?" Silence. "Miss Mitchell, did you seek bids from any other landscaping company before hiring your brother-in-law?" "No, but I knew he would do a good job." "And the fact that you and your husband attended his daughter's wedding in Cabo San Lucas the summer after you awarded him the contract, That was just a coincidence. Barbara's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury saw exactly what this was: someone using their position to benefit family while convincing themselves it was fine because they meant well. The verdict came back guilty on 4 counts of fraud and 2 counts of theft. Cynthia pled guilty to lesser charges before her trial started. Barbara was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. With interest and legal fees, the total came to nearly $60,000. I watched her being led out of the courtroom, her perfect composure finally shattered completely. Part of me felt bad for her. She destroyed her life over HOA politics and some landscaping contracts. But another part of me remembered Linda's frustration over the doormat, Tom's anger over the flower pots, all the residents who'd been harassed and fined over nothing while Barbara enriched herself. "Justice," Tom said quietly, standing next to me in the courthouse hallway. "Yeah," I agreed. "Though it's a sad kind of justice." She made her choices. We gave her every opportunity to do the right thing. He was right. We'd offered to settle the civil case if she'd just returned the money and resigned quietly. She'd refused, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Pride had been her downfall as much as greed. Life at Sunset Creek slowly returned to normal. The new board continued to do a solid job. Property values actually increased as word spread that the HOA was reasonable and well managed. Several units turned over, with new owners specifically mentioning they'd chosen Sunset Creek because of the reformed governance. I kept buying properties when they came available, though I was more transparent about it now. Everyone knew I was the majority owner, and most people seemed fine with it. I'd proven I was invested in the community's success, not just in extracting rent money. 2 years after the election, I was doing maintenance on Unit 7 when Linda knocked on the door. She'd been an excellent vice president, bringing a perspective of fairness and common sense to every decision. "Hey, Harrison, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" Tom's thinking about stepping down as president. His job is getting more demanding, and he doesn't have time for the board anymore. "We were wondering if you'd consider running for his position." I leaned against the doorframe, considering. Would people actually vote for me? I'm not exactly a neutral party. "You own 36 units now," Linda said with a smile. "I'd purchased 4 more as they'd become available. You could vote yourself in without anyone else supporting you. But honestly, I think people would support you anyway. You've proven you care about this place. You've been hands-off with the board, let us do our jobs, and everyone remembers how things were before." "Let me think about it," I said. I talked to Marcus about it that evening over beers at a Scottsdale bar. Conventional wisdom says don't get too involved in HOA politics, but you're already involved. You own 3/4 of the place. Might as well make sure it's run the way you want. "I don't want to be a dictator like Barbara was." "You won't be. You've already shown you can empower good people and step back. But having you visible as president might actually give residents more confidence. They'll know decisions are coming from someone with real skin in the game." I ran for president in the next election. I won easily, though not just from my own votes. Several owner-occupied units voted for me too, including Tom Parker, who left me a voicemail saying I'd earned his trust. Being HOA president of a community you mostly own is a strange experience. Every decision affects your investment, which means you're motivated to make good decisions. But you also have to balance that against what's fair for the residents who don't own their units and for the handful of other owners. I established some new policies. First, no board member could approve any contract where they had a financial interest, even indirectly. Second, all major expenditures required community input. I set up an online forum where residents could discuss and vote on anything over $5,000. Third, violation notices could only be issued for genuine problems that affected safety or property values, with clear photographic evidence and a reasonable cure period. The complex thrived. We used the recovered funds from Barbara's restitution to finally resurface the pool deck and upgrade the clubhouse. We established a community garden where residents could grow vegetables. We organized social events that brought together owners and renters, breaking down the artificial divisions Barbara had created. I stayed on as president for 3 years, then stepped back to let David Chen take over. I'd achieved what I set out to do, created a well-managed community where people wanted to live, where rental properties and owner-occupied units coexisted peacefully, where the HOA served residents instead of terrorizing them. Sometimes I drive past the courthouse where Barbara was tried and think about how differently things could have gone. If she'd just been reasonable, if she'd treated people with respect, if she'd remembered that an HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule it. She'd be living peacefully in her condo, maybe still on the board, definitely not in prison with a felony record. Instead, she let power corrupt her. She convinced herself that her vision was the only right one, that anyone who disagreed was an enemy, that the rules didn't apply to her if she had good intentions. It's a common story, really. HOAs across America deal with similar problems: board members who forget they're servants of the community, not its masters. I learned a lot from the whole experience. About property investment, sure, but more about human nature and community governance. About how small amounts of power can corrupt if there's no accountability. About the importance of transparency and fairness. About standing up to bullies, even when they have official titles. Sunset Creek is a good place now. Families raise kids here. Retirees enjoy their golden years here. Young professionals rent here while they save for their own homes. The pool is always clean, the landscaping is beautiful, and nobody measures doormats. And me? I'm still Harrison Reynolds, property investor. I own 40 of the 48 units now, as others have come up for sale over the years. I've bought them. Eventually, I might own the whole complex, but I'll never manage it the way Barbara tried to. I'll never forget that these aren't just investment units. They're people's homes. The last time I saw Barbara was about 6 months after her release from prison. I was at a grocery store in Temp, and there she was in the produce section, looking smaller somehow, older. She saw me and froze. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might apologize or rage at me one last time. But she just turned and walked away, her cart squeaking slightly as she pushed it toward the exit. And I felt a complicated mixture of emotions: vindication, yes, but also sadness for how much she'd lost, and relief that Sunset Creek had survived her tenure and emerged stronger. I went back to my shopping, loading up on supplies for a barbecue I was hosting at the clubhouse that weekend. We'd started doing them quarterly, a community tradition that brought everyone together. Residents contributed side dishes while I grilled burgers and hot dogs. Kids played in the pool while adults chatted and laughed. That's what Barbara never understood. Community isn't built through violation notices and fines and rigid enforcement of petty rules. It's built through bringing people together, through fair treatment, through remembering that we all share this space and need to make it work for everyone. Standing in that grocery store, loading vegetables and buns and condiments into my cart, I felt genuinely grateful for how everything had turned out. The investment properties were performing well financially. The community was strong. The residents were happy. And I'd learned valuable lessons that would serve me well in future investments. Most importantly, I'd learned that owning property comes with responsibility not just to maintain the buildings, but to contribute to the community around them. To be a good neighbor, even when you're the landlord. To use whatever influence you have to make things better, not to settle scores or push personal agendas. Barbara had the same opportunity I did. She had a position of influence, the ability to shape the community. She could have used it to bring people together, to create a place where everyone felt welcome. Instead, she used it to divide, to punish, to serve herself while claiming to serve others. The difference in outcomes couldn't be more stark. She lost everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom. The community she claimed to love rejected her completely. Meanwhile, I'd gained respect, built a successful investment portfolio, and helped create a genuinely good place to live. As I loaded groceries into my truck, I thought about the barbecue coming up. Linda would bring her famous potato salad. Tom always made too much guacamole, but everyone loved it, so it worked out. David would set up his sound system and play music. Kids would run around while parents relaxed for a few hours. That was the real victory, I realized. Not the election, not even Barbara's conviction. The victory was in building something good, something sustainable, something that made people's lives a little bit better. I drove back to Sunset Creek, past the tasteful sign at the entrance, past the well-maintained landscaping, into the complex that had become more than just an investment to me. It had become proof that property ownership and community values aren't opposed to each other. That landlords can be good neighbors. That HOAs can serve rather than rule. Unit 1 was waiting, my home base in the community I'd helped save and rebuild. I carried the groceries inside, already planning the barbecue, already thinking about the next board meeting, already considering which unit I'd buy next when it came available. Barbara Mitchell had tried to use the HOA as a weapon against people like me. In doing so, she destroyed herself and nearly destroyed the community she claimed to protect. But in the end, the community survived and thrived, stronger for having confronted and overcome her abuse of power. That's the thing about communities, I'd learned. They're resilient. When good people stand up, when they demand fairness and accountability, when they refuse to be bullied by petty tyrants with official titles, communities can heal and grow and become something better than they were. Sunset Creek Condominiums was that something better now. Not perfect, never perfect, but genuinely good. A place where the HOA served its purpose without overstepping, where residents felt secure without feeling controlled, where property values and quality of life both benefited from smart, fair management. And it all started because Barbara Mitchell made the mistake of pushing too hard, of targeting the wrong person, of not realizing that someone owned enough units to vote her entire board off. Her violation notices and ridiculous fines had been meant to drive me away. Instead, they'd driven her away right into a prison cell and permanent disgrace. I put away the groceries and settled onto my couch, looking out the window at the pool area where kids were already swimming, their parents watching from lounge chairs. In 2 days, that same area would be filled with residents gathering for food and fellowship, building the kind of community Barbara had prevented for years. Justice, I thought again. Not just legal justice, though that had come too. But a deeper justice, the kind where good faith and fair dealing eventually win out, where bullies face consequences, where communities can heal from bad leadership and become something better. The sun was setting over Scottsdale, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Another beautiful Arizona evening in a complex that had finally found its footing. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and went out to my patio, nodding to neighbors as they walked past. This was the life I'd built. Not just through buying properties, but through standing up when it mattered, through demanding accountability, through remembering that ownership means responsibility. Barbara had forgotten that. She'd thought ownership meant power and control. She'd learned otherwise the hard way. And Sunset Creek was better for it. So much better that sometimes I had to pinch myself to remember how bad things had been just a few years ago. The transformation was complete from a community terrorized by its own HOA to a place where people actually wanted to live. That was worth more than any return on investment. That was the real success story. And as I sat on my patio, watching the sunset and planning the weekend's barbecue, I knew with absolute certainty that every minute of the fight had been worth it. Barbara Mitchell had reported me for violations, thinking she could bully me into submission. Instead, I'd owned most of the units and voted her entire board off. She'd gone from HOA president to convicted felon. And Sunset Creek had gone from dysfunctional nightmare to thriving community. Sometimes the good guys really do win. Sometimes standing up to petty tyrants actually works. And sometimes, owning 32 condominium units turns out to be exactly the right amount of power to change everything for the better. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the community we'd built, to the residents who'd supported the change, and to the lesson Barbara Mitchell had learned too late. In the end, communities belong to the people who live in them, not to the petty bureaucrats who think they can control them. The story could have ended badly, but it didn't. It ended here on a beautiful Arizona evening in a thriving community where people felt safe and welcome and respected, where HOA rules made sense and were applied fairly, where landlords and owners and renters all coexisted peacefully because someone had finally said enough. That someone had been me. Harrison Reynolds, property investor, accidental activist, HOA president, and ultimately community builder. It wasn't the career path I'd planned when I started buying condos in Scottsdale, but it was the one I'd gotten, and I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe one thing. I would have loved to see Barbara's face when she realized I owned 32 units, and there was nothing she could do to stop me from calling that election. That moment, when her power crumbled and she understood, she'd picked a fight she couldn't win that must have been something to see. But I'd seen the aftermath, and that was enough. I'd seen justice served, the community healed, and good people empowered to make positive changes. I'd seen Sunset Creek transform from a cautionary tale into a success story. And now, as the last light faded from the sky and the pool lights came on, casting blue ripples across the water, I could see the future too. More barbecues, more community growth, more years of fair and sensible management. A place where my investment would grow, but more importantly, where people would thrive. That was the real bottom line, not the financial returns, though those were solid, not the property values, though those were rising. The real measure of success was in the laughter of kids playing, the relaxed conversations of neighbors, the absence of fear and frustration that had defined the Barbara Mitchell era. We'd won. The community had won. And every time I looked around Sunset Creek, I was reminded of why that victory mattered. Not for me personally, though I certainly benefited, but for everyone who called this place home, whether they owned their unit or rented it, whether they'd been here for years or just moved in. This was what HOAs were supposed to be. This was what community governance should look like. Fair, transparent, reasonable, and always focused on serving the people who lived here rather than controlling them. Barbara Mitchell had shown us what happens when HOAs go wrong. But in doing so, she'd given us the opportunity to show what happens when they go right. And that, in the end, was the greatest irony of all. Her abuse of power had created the conditions for genuine good governance to emerge. I finished my beer and headed inside, already looking forward to tomorrow, to the barbecue coming up, to another day in the community I'd fought for and helped transform. The story of HOA board reported me for violations, and how I owned most units and voted them all off the board, had come to its natural conclusion. But the story of Sunset Creek condominiums, of building and maintaining a genuinely good community, that story was just beginning. And I was grateful to be part of it, grateful for the fight that had led here, grateful for the victory that made all the difference. The lights of Scottsdale sparkled in the distance as I closed my patio door and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to prove that good leadership and fair governance really do matter. But tonight, I could rest easy, knowing that Sunset Creek was in good hands, that justice had been served, and that sometimes, just sometimes, standing up to HOA tyrants actually works out exactly the way it should. Barbara Mitchell had learned that lesson the hard way. The rest of us got to benefit from it, and in a strange way, I was almost grateful to her for being so unreasonable, so corrupt, so willing to abuse her power. Because without her as a villain, I might never have become the unlikely hero of this story. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. You start out just trying to build a real estate portfolio, and you end up saving a community from its own HOA board. You think you're just defending yourself from unfair violations, and you end up exposing fraud and corruption. You assume you'll stay in the background as an investor, and you end up as president of the HOA, leading the very community you once just wanted to profit from. But those unexpected turns, those moments when circumstances force you to step up and be more than you plan to be, those are the moments that define us. Barbara Mitchell was defined by her abuse of power and subsequent fall. I was defined by standing up to it and helping build something better. And Sunset Creek, it was defined by resilience, by the ability to overcome bad leadership and emerge stronger, by proving that communities really can govern themselves well when given the chance. That was the real story. Not just about one man voting off an HOA board, but about an entire community finding its voice and reclaiming its future. I just happened to be the catalyst, the person who owned enough units to force the issue. But the victory belonged to everyone, to Tom and Linda and David, who stepped up to serve, to the residents who supported change, to the renters who proved they could be valuable community members, to everyone who refused to accept Barbara's vision of HOA tyranny as the way things had to be. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about all the HOAs across America dealing with similar issues. Boards that forget their place, leaders who abuse their power, residents who suffer under unreasonable rules. And I hoped that maybe, somehow, our story would reach some of them, would inspire them to stand up, to demand better, to remember that HOAs are supposed to serve communities, not rule them, because in the end, that's what this whole experience had taught me. Power belongs to the people willing to exercise it responsibly. Leadership means serving others, not controlling them. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for your investment is to invest in the community around it. Barbara Mitchell never learned those lessons, but the rest of us at Sunset Creek did, and we were all better off for it.